Hi, fourth grade. This is Miss Bruin in the virtual science lab. And this week, we are going to be looking at symbols, patterns, and code. So maybe you've been using symbols your whole life and you didn't even realize it. Like if you look at some of the symbols that we use with our bodies all the time, maybe a wave to say hi, thumbs up, thumbs down. We use body language to communicate messages to the people around us all the time. Or if you think about it, walking down the street, walking through your school, there are so many different visual symbols that communicate a message to us. The fire alarm, right? Arrows tell us which direction to use, which staircase to use. Symbols are just a mark or a sign or a picture that stands for something else, that has a meaning that everybody understands. Have you ever seen somebody use the peace sign to say, see you later or what's up? You've probably used thumbs down to let your teacher know that there's something going wrong here, right? I don't understand, or this stinks. Maybe you've used or you've seen this symbol recently in the news or on the internet. This is a famous Black Power fist to kind of show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And then there's, of course, different ways that people greet each other using different gestures or body language or visual signals. This week, we're going to be exploring a couple of big questions. How can we use light and sound to communicate messages or information to people who might not be so close to us? How can we transfer messages or communicate to people that are really far away across long distances? We're going to look at some ways that people in the past have designed codes that use symbols, maybe even use light and sound to send really complex messages. So, what kinds of symbols have you encountered in your life? What are some of the ways that we communicate using symbols? And you'll notice here, there are some visual symbols, symbols that use color or patterns and stripes, but there are also symbols here that use sound and light to show or send some very important messages that keep people safe. I'm sure you can think of countless others. Make sure to jot some of those symbols down in your notebook. You might actually use them for inspiration when you're designing your own code in a couple of lessons. So, some of the examples that I thought of where cities actually use light to send messages. One of them is very special to New York. It's unique to New York. It's the one on the left. So every year on September 11th, and maybe in the days before and after, um, you'll see that there are two beams of light beaming up into the sky. And those two beams of light are there to remind us of what we lost that day. And the other one that I thought of was Gotham City, which is a fictional city in the Batman comic book. And whenever there's a horrible crime going on and they need Batman, what they do is they shine the bat insignia up into the sky. So they shine that symbol using a huge spotlight to message that we need you, Batman. So people have been using different creative ways to remind people about things, send messages to members of the community in this way for years and years, both in real life and in fiction. What do you notice here? This is another way that certain people communicated messages. According to the research, certain Native American tribes used smoke signals to communicate messages across long distances. They might signal or warn of danger, and each tribe had its own set of codes. So they had their own patterns, and they would use a blanket to hold and release smoke. And each set of short and long puffs might have meant something different. So whoever was sending the smoke signal might release a long puff of smoke and then a short puff of smoke, and they would set up a pattern ahead of time so that everybody understood what message was being sent with each pattern of short and long puffs. So just to review, a symbol is just a visual object or mark that stands for something else. We see and use symbols all the time in our everyday life. A pattern is a regular or repeated way in which something happens or occurs. And a code is a pattern of symbols that can be used to communicate a message. Think about that as we talk about this next example. So I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Morse code. The story is really interesting. Um, the man who invented Morse code invented it because he got word that his wife was really sick through the mail, because the only way to send messages was through writing a letter. And it took months to get the letter, depending on how far you were. It took weeks or months. So he gets this letter saying his wife is really sick. He rushes home, and by the time he gets home, his wife has died. So he decides this is a terrible, like, if you need to send a message quickly, we need a better way. We need a more effective, more efficient way to do that. And so he designs the telegraph machine. And his assistant comes up with this code that people started using that becomes this universal, international standard way of communicating. So, scientists, you could probably tell from listening to my message being sent via, it wasn't through a real telegraph machine. There's a website where you can get your Morse code message translated. But Morse code took our English language and transferred each letter into a series of dots and dashes. And those dots and dashes had a visual code like the one you see on the screen. So somebody would translate your message from letters and words into dots and dashes, and they would send that series of dots and dashes, that pattern, across to another operator who would then translate your dots and dashes, those sounds that you heard in the last scene, back into the letters that corresponded with each pattern of dots and dashes. Pretty fascinating. So, Morse code used sound energy and transferred information that was sent in words in our language into sound energy. And then once that message was sent to where it needed to get sent, it would be translated back into letters and words, which then created a message, a meaningful message for someone. Here's my last challenge for you. Can you use the Morse code to decode my message? So can you take each symbol and translate it back into words and figure out my message? I'm going to leave you with that. And we're going to continue to talk about patterns in light and patterns in sound and how we can use those patterns to create some form of communication. Oh, and if you want to experiment with sending your own messages via Morse code, you can go to this website, type out your message in Morse code using the alphabet, and it will translate it so you can actually hear what it sounds like when it translates the letters into sound energy, and you can share it with a friend or not. You can just experiment with different kinds of messages and get a real sense of how the telegraph actually worked and how Morse code actually worked. Have fun, and I'll see you next time.